a lot of times that we look at and we say like, yeah, a human probably did not write this. And I think, the ones that are sticking out a little bit to me, the ones that I see as kind of a little bit more of a pattern is sort of you're a developer and you've prompted an AI and you've said, I need you to solve this problem, but you haven't given it sufficient context in your project to know how to do that the right way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Simply Offensive. Today I'm joined by Darius Houle. Darius was a recommendation from Mike Bell, the CEO of Suzu Labs. They used to work together and he recommended Darius to join. So welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Phil. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And I noticed one of the companies you work for, I've been really kind of impressed with them for years because I used to NYU, whoever taught, I think someone that used to work there, taught some classes at NYU, and they used to have links up to the content for the course there, their security course, or some of the pen testing courses or AppSec courses. It was some pretty interesting content. And I kind of noticed this stuff going in. It's kind of a motivator when I got into teaching and I saw this content. Then I noticed after a while that it got changed. The content got changed to like a CTF resource on how to do CTFs and stuff. But that was kind of one of the first places I got really familiar with that organization.
Yeah. Of course, you're talking about Trillobits.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, and that kind of attitude, like, definitely has been pervasive. Still continues at the company now. Like, they're still teaching, still learning, still kind of have that like scrappy hacker attitude that they did back then. And so I'm about 9 months in my tenure there, and it's been a whirlwind since I started. Absolute like joy to be part of the org, and I'm having a ton of fun with the kinds of engagements that we're doing there.
That's really good to see companies that have been around that long and still maintain that, original feel and vibe that they had, because you take some companies over the years, they change, they become very corporate because there's some, I'm not going to name names, that had blogs out there and they may still produce some good content, but at one time they were more heavily involved in the community. They were releasing all sorts of open source tools, had some great information on the blogs. And then some of them just become so corporate, you just don't recognize them as the original company anymore.
Yeah, one of the things that like stood out to me when I joined, that I was like, this was like a very positive culture signal, is like immediately when you join the company, there's a Slack channel called Ask Dan. And if you want, you can just go right in there and you can ask the CEO a question about anything. And it's an active channel. People use it. So, it's pretty cool to walk into an org that large and the one that's been around as long as it has, and still be able to kind of just like open door policy the CEO and see kind of the impact that he has on the culture and everything to this day. Right?
Yeah, that's very cool. Culture is very important. And speaking of your CEO, I'm pretty sure that I had some software security books written by him where he was a co-author on.
I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised. He's pretty prolific, and if I had to guess, slightly sleep disordered. He produces a lot more than a single person should.
So before you get too far into it, if you wouldn't mind sharing your origin story, kind of how you got started up until where you're at today.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. So my origin is probably a little bit more of a hacker origin story. And then there was a software part of my career. And then now I'm back to the hacker part again. But when I started, you probably have heard this before in the past, but I was really interested when I was, around 15 or 16. I was like, man, I got to figure out how these computer things work under the hood. There's just something magical about them. And like, just filled with infinite mysteries, closest thing to magic I'd ever seen. I ended up, doing some capture the flags and things like that, and really falling into this group of people who were really interested in reverse engineering software, and found like a real love of bug hunting, and then also a love of doing some things with 30-day trials that I can't talk about, and we'll just pretend it didn't happen, but taught me some incredible fundamentals about computing that eventually just kind of launched my career as a software developer. So I started out doing some mobile phone programming, kind of in the consulting space, worked in fintech for a while and kind of cut my teeth on a lot of different kinds of softwares and a lot of different types of platforms, which was a really incredible way to kind of get the context that I needed to ultimately do what I do now, which is I spend a lot more time kind of reviewing code and as an AppSec engineer, and thinking about through the security architecture and the implications of how people put things together, right? And that kind of takes me to now where I'm at Trillobits, where I do that AppSec and assurance practice work with them, right? But that was kind of the abbreviated, how did we get there?
So yeah, so how did you get educated to do something like that? Did you go to a university or all self-learned, or how'd you get in?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny one. So I did go to the university. I'd go to a university. I went to Boise State University here, where I'm based out of. And I had a great time. But ultimately, my degree was actually a business degree. So I thought IT management was maybe the route that I was going to go. If I'm being honest, I think when I went to school, I just there was a lot of options. No one really did what I was interested in around me in my kind of formative years. So I was like, kind of put a my thumb down on the map somewhere and said, yeah, that sounds like a degree I might do. So ultimately, kind of a business program. While I was doing that, I think I was, behind the scenes, kind of like sitting over there, like maybe I should have done computer science. So I kind of supplemented a lot of that knowledge myself. I was always building. Kind of all my projects eventually gravitated towards that kind of space. So I started out as like my like absolute first position I ever had. I was a IT support technician for the student newspaper at BSU, which ended up being an incredible role because I had a mentor, Brad Arndt. He was incredible. He saw the potential in me and he was like, I got to use this kid to like build an app and start automating some of the processes of the student newspaper and stuff like that. So he put me on all these like cool projects and helped me cut my teeth sort of outside of my career program that I was doing at the university. I found my real passion there. So I never really ended up doing much with the business, management part of that, but got a ton out of the education ultimately, but a little bit of not exactly a straight line path.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's just really interesting too how a lot of people end up working in totally different areas. It takes sometimes getting exposure to certain technologies to really figure out what you're meant to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, um, from there, when I finished school, that set me up really well because I had a lot of that hands-on experience that people were looking for. Um, to go and try to land a job in mobile phone programming, which I had now done a little bit of, and then fintech subsequently from there, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think a good lesson for folks listening that are just getting started or early in their career is just kind of the way you've done things, how you started out in software development and then eventually into application security, because a lot of times it's good and bad at the same time these days because you can jump right in the middle of something without having to work these certain areas of the field. Because for me, I work in pen testing, but I started out in IT. Being a pen tester would have been an option from day one. I would have done that. But the thing is, I would have missed out on 6 years of sysadmin experience, all the operating system stuff and networking that helped me a lot with infrastructure pen testing, which I would have missed out on. So that's really good lesson for people listening, is just kind of the path you took. Because if people are always asking, what area of pen testing should I go into or whatever, and you see people with development backgrounds, like, wow, you should go into application security, because some other folks that want to do application security may have security experience, but they don't understand applications. And that's a whole nother learning curve.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately, because I got so much out of that software background that helps me now as a security engineer. That depth of knowledge is invaluable. I think about a lot, the people who are now learning with an AI assistant and kind of like the scale at which they can build. But, I worry, like, is that foundational knowledge of what they're building, in place too? Um, like, is it going to be harder for someone to build that background up now and truly understand that well enough to kind of like, do an AppSec role at a proficient level, right? And it's kind of it's something that I'm kind of grappling with because like I obviously see like AI as like a huge learning assistant potentially, but it's I've seen it even with myself, like it's very easy to fall back onto it as a crutch, as well, and then kind of say I'll I think it was Daniel Miessler said, keep the robots out of the gym. Like, I'll let the robot do this lift for me, right? And then, kind of letting it do the work and really missing out on what I should be, putting in my head, right?
Yeah, that's the scary thing about it. It makes it too easy because when there's an easier way of doing things or try to skip ahead. So that is kind of scary to think of.
Yeah, it's interesting too, though. I think a lot of people who talk about it right now in a professional context, it's like it makes me so much more efficient as someone who has been doing this for a while. But I worry, like, I look back at, when I was just starting out in my first AppSec role, what would that have looked like? Would I have relied on it a little bit too much of a crutch? And would there be too many of these, like, what do I not know? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like sometimes when you have some of these resources, it makes it a little more difficult to want to learn the hard way or learn the good way. And part of those are some of the things, if you look at some of the tools that have evolved over the years, they have really prevented people from really having to script as much. Because you look at if you're wanting to do brute force a login or any kind of login stuff on an application, Burp Suite makes it a lot easier. But back when you had to deal with something like Hydra, and Hydra made it a lot more difficult to go through and put in all the HTTP request syntax and everything to get it to work right, is such a pain. Now you go into Burp Suite and it's real easy. And I know other tools that come along and make it easier. So I can see I've really seen how for me, it's limited me doing as much scripting and stuff because here, you can use this tool. I don't have to do that, which is a good thing. But at the same time, some of the learning opportunities are missed out on.
Well, and it's crazy now, right? With and I haven't played a ton with it yet, but with the Burp AI and everything like that, it's going to get even more like where you can just kind of open Burp Suite and be like, yeah, just click the buttons for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty amazing. So with AI and all that, have you used any AI for any kind of security testing?
Yeah. So, one of the things, it's been really interesting working at Trillobits right now because the company is kind of trying to position itself as a, front runner, not only in people who perform AI pen testing services, but also, people who innovate in the AI space and use it as part of their assurance practice, right? So like, one of the things that was really cool that I contributed to recently, we have a public skills repo. And this is kind of like agentic skills. So you can plug in Claude and you can say, hey, Claude, go use the Trillobits insecure default skill and tell me anywhere in my application that it fails open. Right. Anything I should look at there. Right. That would have been something, that took a lot of time for me in the past. And I'd have a lot of patterns to look for, and a lot of kind of like decision trees in my head over like, okay, so this part of the code base is in Rust. So I'd have to look for this kind of pattern, et cetera. But now it kind of just becomes sort of like a plain English, like instruction manual that says like, hey, do this, produce an output in this kind of format and then you're kind of off to the races. But it's incredible, like working on stuff like that is like just really like kind of blowing my mind right now. Because if you were to ask me, like, did you think this would be the kind of security tool you'd be writing? If you asked me that even like 2 years ago, I would say like, no, that sounds a little Star Trek-y, right? It's like I'm writing an instruction manual for a bot that does that task really that well. I'd kind of like roll my eyes at you. But here I am. And then not only that, it's like we're democratizing that information and saying, hey, yeah, like you can go download this skills repo and make this part of your workflow too. And it's just so interesting. It shifts a lot of our value proposition into kind of the interpretation, the services offered, and just kind of that bleeding edge and niche tool development. I don't know. All that to say, it's like it's just an incredibly interesting time to be working in that space, right? So a
Yeah.
little
So
bit of a
what's
long
your,
answer.
yeah, no, that's good. So what's your recommendation for folks that are wanting to get started in cybersecurity with using AI? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. I think one of the things is, you know, people want a lot of times. I think they like jump to a solution before they understand the technology or the problem. So, they might go and they might just be like, oh, I'm going to go find one of the many like agentic pen testing tools right now and jump straight into trying to learn that and implement it in their area without like kind of understanding the picture. And what I would advocate for is like taking a step back. And if you want to kind of, be effective in this space and really understand it well, it's almost like when I was learning Python a million years ago, there was this great book, Automate the Boring Stuff. And it was amazing. It was like a hands-on kind of like fun way to learn Python through a bunch of small little projects. And it really got you familiar with the ins and outs of the scripting language, right? And I'd almost say the same thing with AI. Before you go jump into a huge deal with like a complicated platform or something like that, start small, use Claude Code, make a small application with it. Think about how it did it compared to, how you would do it, compare and contrast. And then start learning, kind of from the people who are saying like, wow, this is like 10xing my productivity. Start picking out little pieces of what they're doing. So you'll notice, like, oh, they're really using skills to their advantage, or like, oh wow, I didn't know you could parallelize agents and get 3 things done at once, right? Or you'll be like, oh wow, if you tell the agent to write a test and then keep trying until it passes, you get way better quality results. Kind of little tasks like that add up to like a lot stronger foundational knowledge of AI. And then you're going to be a much more like competent, decision maker, understander of AI tools. And then you're going to be able to wield things like Burp Suite AI and something like Expo very effectively. And you're going to know its strengths, and you're going to know, where you need to put in the work with kind of the human in the loop, right?
Yeah, it's kind of nice too if you learn some of those things, because when you mention some of the other tools, if there's kind of gaps in what they do, if you can, create this stuff yourself, then you're going to go a little bit further than having to totally be dependent on the tool.
Yeah, yeah. And more, I think, what we're going to see is like a world in which people feel more empowered than ever to kind of build that small, piece of whatever that they don't have, that connector between X and Y, or that missing feature, or that small app that does this, which is kind of really interesting, for when you think about, a lot of the like small app SaaS market space, right? Especially in the security world, because I think you're going to see a lot of teams that feel very emboldened to kind of start building their own ad hoc tools.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you mentioned that. One of the things I really noticed from the security community are a lot more people are building tools that weren't building tools before.
Yeah, and I think that's, for the most part, pretty cool. There's a lot of FUD. Obviously, there's security quality implications, data, handling concerns, things like that. But if you kind of zoom out a little bit and just look at it, purely from kind of the, technological empowerment point of view, it's a really exciting time to be able to do any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, what's really cool about that is the fact that more people are doing that, because one of the things is maybe someone comes out with a tool and it doesn't work all that great. Maybe it inspires someone else to join that project and make it better, or come out with a better solution altogether.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree.
So as far as working in AppSec, have you seen any effects on some of the applications that are coming out now with people using AI?
Definitely. There's, certain kinds of like findings that I think in the back of our heads a lot of times that we look at and we say like, yeah, a human probably did not write this. And I think, the ones that are sticking out a little bit to me, the ones that I see as kind of a little bit more of a pattern, is sort of you're a developer and you've prompted an AI and you've said, I need you to solve this problem, but you haven't given it sufficient context in your project to know how to do that the right way. And so I'll give you an example here. Say, you use database framework Y that has, a type safe query builder in it. And it doesn't have that context. Maybe you haven't set that up, or it just hasn't looked for it. Your coding agent doesn't know about it. And you ask it, I need you to go do a task. And it says, okay, I'll go do that. And with no awareness of your, safe, framework for queries, it goes and generates, something 200 or 300 lines long with a lot of, deep complexity in the method that's hard to maintain, hard to understand, but it does work, right? And that's where you're like, oh, shoot, You may have introduced you've introduced complexity at best and rust at best, but you may have introduced a security flaw at worst. So it's kind of interesting because you start giving recommendations that are twofold. It's like one, you know, use the software as intended, use this safe query feature, right? But also here's the context that you're missing with your agent that would have helped it not write something this crazy, right? And then you start giving advice on kind of like guardrails one, but also just like effective context for their coding agents. So it's a real mental shift, and a lot of times when you look at stuff like that. So that would be kind of like the example that just jumps straight to mind when you ask that.
Yeah, but some of the things I would imagine that we're not going to see is some people that are vibe coding stuff that don't have the budget and the funding to do things the right way, and they don't know to have stuff pen tested, and they're just building it. So sure, there's a lot of stuff that we aren't seeing.
Yeah, of course, definitely. And I mentioned it before, but it's like the scary thing always is like, what are the things that you don't know, right? Because the AI doesn't necessarily know that you need to have those filled in, right? Those gaps in your knowledge. So it's going to take you at face value sometimes. And when you ask for something a certain way, it's going to do something a certain way. And as well as I do, like, computers are great at being literal. That's not always what you want sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, I know you were before we got started. You mentioned that you recently spoke at DistrictCon. So what did you speak about?
But yeah, that was a fun conference and a great talk. So while I was at DistrictCon, I spoke on a topic. It was a vulnerability I discovered in the Electron framework last year. It's kind of an interesting one. It's a little bit of a neglected area, I think, sometimes, but it was kind of in the local threat model of Electron, which, if anyone's not familiar, it's a framework for building desktop applications using web technologies. So it's built on top of Chrome and Node.js. But essentially, I found an issue in that framework that would make it so when it was in its most strict uh, code signing and integrity checking configuration, you could bypass that and sideload JavaScript that was untrusted and run that within an application, which is really interesting kind of from the mindset of, like a red teamer or something like that, because what you have at that point is you have an application that's trusted. It's signed by a key that's well respected. And let's say the Microsoft ecosystem. Also, at least self-reporting that its code is intact and not modified, and it's highly capable in that it runs on a web browser and it runs on Node.js. So there's a lot going on there. So if you were to build kind of an implant on that side-loaded code, it's very stealthy. Uh, to an EDR, just looks like one of your applications doing whatever it does normally. But you have kind of the full power of the entire node framework behind you to write an implant as an attacker, which is pretty exciting, stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty important these days since sometimes it can be hard to get a foothold and bypass an EDR. It sounds like a pretty interesting way to do that.
Yeah, there's like so much I could talk about in that space, but the thing I think that's like really cool about this technique is, there's no binary artifacts. So you're not sideloading even like a DLL or anything like that. So what you're doing is you're actually clobbering essentially what looks like a cache file for Chrome. It's called a heap snapshot. And it's essentially just an optimization file. And it stores V8 bytecode, like the JavaScript bytecode. So it's like not particularly like obvious what you've done as an attacker, but you have that kind of full capability of the JavaScript ecosystem, like I said. So you get dynamic code execution. You don't have any binaries on disk. And I think what the coolest thing is, if you were to like say, write an implant for a piece of software like Slack or something like that, you inherit the usage patterns too of whatever productivity software that you've backdoored, right? So that's really cool as an advanced threat actor, right? You're like, this thing flicks on when you go to work in the morning, it turns off when you go home, right? And it's using, your transports, right? Your HTTP calls from this process. It's just like a really cool way to operate, right?
Yeah, that's very cool. So how
So
was District? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say is, what made this one really interesting is just a lot of the like, big names in the space that use the Electron framework. So I brought up when we disclosed this to Electron, we did some courtesy disclosures as well to Signal, 1Password, and Slack, which were all kind of affected by this. That was a pretty cool kind of response from them. They were all like, they handled it very well. They were all like very responsive to it and all patched it like very expeditiously. So that was like neat to see the response and kind of like acknowledgement that something in the local threat model was something they took that seriously.
That's good. So how was DistrictCon?
Yeah. So, man, highlights for me, they have this section of DistrictCon called Junkyard. It's like end of life software that our people are finding vulnerabilities for. And I saw some of my like favorite, like hands-on kind of like pwn to own style exploitation over there. I think, like I'll call out my favorite, someone finding a buffer overflow in the save file format of Roller Coaster Tycoon. But it got even better. They exploited it such that they created a save file that when downloaded it and loaded in Roller Coaster Tycoon, you would load it, it would hijack the rendering pipeline, and then you would play Doom within Roller Coaster Tycoon. So, some crazy, crazy hackers over there, and just like absolutely fun to see them cook. The main track's, really, really interesting, obviously, as well. But where I think it really shone for me was like that kind of hands-on stuff. The village was a blast. And one of the things, it doubled in size since the year before, but it still felt like, you could sit down, meet people. You weren't waiting in lines for everything. The villages, you could actually sit down and like, do the hands-on stuff with people. So that was really cool. And coming from some other conferences that are becoming more and more kind of like packed, that's like a really refreshing thing to see like the attendance sort of line up with the like experience there.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, so this was when, so they did they move the date this year? Because I know last year around the same time ShmooCon was, were they like later in the year last year?
I'm not sure on that one. I'd have to check.
Yeah, just kind of curious because I didn't know if they kind of adjusted the date to kind of fill the void for what used to be ShmooCon, because ShmooCon was in January in the DC area. And when I looked up, I think they were actually in the same hotel, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, if they could move it anywhere that I wouldn't get stuck in a winter storm on the way home, that would be cool. I've spent about a day and a half in airports just trying to get out of there.
That's no
It's a
fun.
mess.
Well, I bet I guess some of that same front come through here in Texas because we rarely get ice, but we got ice and we're stuck in the home for, from Friday to we got out Thursday the next week. Things starting to thaw and stuff, but fortunately we didn't lose electricity because in 2021 we ran into something similar and we had intermittent power, so we'd have to charge phones up whenever the electricity was on for a little bit. You know,
Man.
so take advantage of the electricity being on when it's on and
Yeah, well, I'll tell
no
you what,
fun.
it's 50 degrees and sunny here right now in Boise, and I'm loving that, even if it is a little bit unusual for early February.
Yeah, that's good. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. Is there anything you'd like to share before we end the episode?
Check out Trillobits Skills. That's our newest community project. We're definitely excited to hear feedback and see pull requests and just understand how people are using it. Other than that, no, thanks so much for having me, Phil. This was a blast getting to chat with you.
Yeah, same. Likewise. I look forward to getting to talk to you in person sometime. And there'll be links to Darius's LinkedIn as well as the resource he shared for Trillobits in the show notes so you can easily find it and take advantage of those resources. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you in the next episode. Make sure to subscribe and share with your friends. Until next time, take care.